Albert Collins wasn't just the master of the Telecaster. The attack and tone he put out also earned him the nickname the Iceman. Listening to him play his Telecaster, you can understand why. His career really didn't start to take off until he was in his late 30s, and a few years after that, when he signed with Alligator Records, the albums and touring really took off. Although cancer took his life at age 61, Albert Collins made a name for himself as one of the best blues guitarists around. His style, tone, and technique came from his early life and the players he met along the way. So let's take a look back and see just how Albert Collins developed his unique style. He was born Albert Gene Drury in Leona, Texas on October 1st, 1932. His family moved up to Houston area when Albert was 9 years old. He started out playing on the piano and organ and listening to jazz, but said that he didn't have too much success with the keys. A cousin named Willie Young showed him some runs on the guitar, which we'll get into later on. But it was another cousin, Lightning Hopkins, who used to come around and play the family reunions when Albert was a teen, that got him really interested in the guitar. Albert gives Lightning a lot of credit. Between that and the influence of Johnny Lee Hooker, meeting up with T-Bone Walker and Gatemouth Brown, it was all the influence he would need. At 18, Albert started his own group, the Rhythm Rockers. During this time, to make ends meet, he was employed at a ranch in Normandy, Texas for around 4 years. He then worked as a truck driver for various companies for the next 12 years, while working hard and dreaming of a career as a guitarist. Albert started to play regularly in and around the Houston area. He would play at Shady's Playhouse, where James Widemouth Brown, who was the brother of Gatemouth, and other well-known Houston blues musicians would meet for what was called the Blue Monday Jams. By the mid-1950s, he had pretty much established his reputation as a local guitarist and has started to appear regularly with the group Big Tiny and the Thunderbirds. In 1964, he recorded Frosty at Gulf Coast Recording Studios in Beaumont, Texas for Hall Records. It was owned by Bill Hall, who had signed Collins on the recommendation of cowboy Jack Clement. Now, if the name Jack Clement doesn't ring a bell with you, one thing he's well known for is working for Sam Phillips at Sun Records and had engineered sessions for Jerry Lee Lewis and Johnny Cash. Then in 1965, Hall Records would release the Cool Sound of Albert Collins album. This album is a great example of Texas electric blues sound. It's said that this album was one of the favorites of Billy Gibbons and Jimi Hendrix. Around early 1968, after playing a gig in Houston, the group Canned Heat went to hear Albert play, and after the show, got talking to him and offered help to get him an agent and out to California, where they said the music was happening. Albert said he was concerned that the white crowd out in the West Coast might not accept him and his style of music. But that wasn't the case at all. The move out to California was to be the right decision, where Albert established himself as a regular act on the West Coast circuit, playing at the Fillmore West and the Whiskey A Go-Go, along with other big events, one of which was the Newport 69 Festival held in June of 1969, with over 150,000 people in attendance. On the day Albert played, some of the other acts were Creedence Clearwater Revival, Eric Burdon, Steppenwolf, and Jethro Tull. Albert played on Saturday of the 3-day event and was well received. A few of the other big names there on the other days were Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter, the Byrds, Ike and Tina Turner, and Poco. Although he was concerned about moving to California at first, it was proving to be the right decision, with Albert establishing himself as a regular act on the West Coast circuit. As the 60s turned into the 70s, what was next for Albert Collins, who was getting close to 40 years old? Before we go there, let's find out some about his guitars and amps and how he evolved as a player. Albert played a few different guitars early on, including an Epiphone with his first group, the Rhythm Rockers. But in 1952, after seeing Gatemouth Brown playing a Fender Esquire, he decided to purchase a Fender. He wanted a Telecaster, but because of the price, he chose to buy an Esquire. This was his main guitar until he moved to California, and it was a guitar that he used on his earliest recordings. But he's best known for that 66 custom Fender Telecaster with the Gibson PAF humbucker in the neck position. He used a capo on his guitar most times, particularly on the 5th, 7th, and 9th frets. He'd use open tunings. He primarily favored an open F minor tuning or a D minor. Albert said that his unusual tunings came from his cousin, Willow Young, who taught him some of his first runs on the guitar. He played without picks, using his thumb and first finger. His amp of choice was the Fender Quad Reverb. This was a 100-watt combo with 4 12-inch speakers, very heavy and loud amplifier. Albert would crank it up and use the tone and volume knobs on his Telecaster to adjust. In late 1971, Albert signed with Tumbleweed Records. Tumbleweed was located in Denver, Colorado, and was run by Bill Szymczyk, who would later go on to produce many of the Eagles' biggest hits. But Tumbleweed didn't last long and closed its doors in 1973 because of financial problems, leaving Albert without a record deal. Then, in 1978, he was signed by Alligator Records. His first release for the label was Ice Pickin', which was recorded in Chicago. Albert's greatest success came after he signed with Alligator in 1978 and cut Ice Pickin'. It won the Best Blues Album of the Year award from the Montreux Jazz Festival and was nominated for a Grammy. His following Alligator albums helped him earn every award the blues world had to offer, including a W.C. Handy Award in the category of Best Contemporary Blues Album in 1983 for his Alligator release, Don't Lose Your Cool. Albert would be nominated for a Grammy 8 times. He would take home the award only once, and that was in 1986. Albert, along with Robert Cray and Johnny Copeland, for their album Showdown. Robert Cray always looked up to Albert after he had played at his high school graduation party in Tacoma, Washington around 1971. That was it, Robert recalls. That changed my whole life around. From that moment, I started to seriously study the blues. Robert began emulating Albert's licks, which were difficult to reproduce on a standard tuned guitar and required some crazy stretches. I'd hear something that Albert was playing, not realizing that it maybe took him 2 fingers to press down on 6 strings in those minor tunings with the capo he used to get that sound. And with my standard tuning, it usually meant a mile-long stretch. But I worked on it until I finally got it down. Later on, in the mid to late 70s, Albert Collins would hire Robert Cray and his band to back him up. He was like a father to us, Cray would say. He showed us the ropes, showed us how to travel, and to get along on the road. It was a great time, and he became a good friend. I just thought this was a great story, since they would go on to win a Grammy together for that Showdown album. On into the 80s, Albert would make quite a few appearances. He was even on Late Night with David Letterman. He made an appearance in the movie Adventures in Babysitting, and you could always see him on the stage with some of the greats, George Thorogood, Joe Walsh, and he even played the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival in a group consisting of B.B. King, Eric Clapton, and Stevie Ray Vaughan. The group played on a steamboat. One thing you always noticed about Albert is he had a lot of charisma on stage. He was great with his audience. He seemed real and down to earth and always having a good time. Even after he was firmly established as a major blues act, he never got too big for his fans and friends. You'd always see him behind the wheel of his old tour bus, which he just loved to drive to gigs. Albert was always on stage with the greats of blues. I could go on forever with some of the players he's jammed with. I guess my 2 favorites are Rory Gallagher, and there's some recordings of this on YouTube, and I'll leave a link for it. The one I listen and watch the most is with him, Lonnie Mack, and Roy Buchanan. It just doesn't get any better than that. These 3 guys just kill it. The way Albert slaps the strings with his fingers and the style of picking and that tone he gets just always amazes me. I guess he came by using his fingers to pick from Gatemouth Brown, who played with his thumb and finger the exact same way. Albert died in November of 1993 after a very short battle with cancer. He was 61 years old. He's been gone over 30 years, but the Iceman will never be forgotten. If you enjoyed this video, here are a couple more I think you might like on the channel. Check them out if you have time. Also, check out in the description box for some of Albert Collins' links. Thank you all for watching. I do appreciate it.